Good evening, Mr. Chair, Vice Chairs, Ranking Members. My condolences to Chair Cassano. Thank you to all of my colleagues for working on this important issue, given the very real need for affordable housing in the state, and for your attention for these many hours. To be honest, I'm here somewhat reluctantly because I don't want to contribute to what I would characterize as abject fear that has emerged around this topic in my part of the woods, or imply that we should do nothing. But I have waited over 8 hours because I do have concerns about the current bills being discussed today. I understand the fear very well. Until February, I served on Norwalk's zoning commission, and even with our very aggressive goals around diversified housing stock and affordable housing, we still denied several applications, or we worked with them to change their original proposal. And our strategic work in this area for our community would have conflicted with some of the tenets in these bills at times. And despite adding thousands of apartments, our pricing is still quite high. So I worry about what number of housing units would be required before prices actually drop. On the other side of the coin, I grew up in affordable housing, a little 4-unit apartment building on a main street, a half-mile from a transit station in a nice affluent neighborhood. And our address gave me access to opportunities without which I would not be here today. So I understand that point of view as well, and I support the need to act. I do believe there are some good things in the various bills that you're considering today, and I hope this committee can work together to come up with actual solutions. So 3 minutes is short. I'll just highlight a few things that I'm concerned about. I can't in good faith support the removal of a local public hearing process, which I believe to be the very foundation of the checks and balances needed between communities and developers. Residents often know more than traffic experts, developers, and I dare say legislators. So I appeal to this committee to be very careful about designing any policy for as of right development, because on my local commission, we often saw the experts were wrong just because they didn't know our community as well. I believe that removing parking requirements is a bit premature for where we are as a society. Even if you can walk to transit, that does not mean you can get to your job at this point in the state, or supermarkets, parks, doctor's offices, fill in the blank.
I think your 3 minutes is up.
Okay, I'll conclude there. I just wanted to say I'm also concerned about the 10% affordability. 10 units or more, to me, based on my own experiences, it seems like it does nothing for affordability in our part of the state, but could just be a boon to developers. I'm happy to answer any questions, and I'll try to submit written testimony later.
Thank you so much, Representative, and thank you for your patience today. 8 hours.
I've been on the whole time, long day. I'm sorry for you.
I see Senator Wong's hand is raised.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Representative Thomas, thank you so much for your efficient and very effective 3 minutes in articulating your ideas. And I do look forward to having you be an integral part of any part of the solution. I think if you heard my exchange with Mr. DeLong of CCM, my hope and desire is that we will reconstitute a much more diverse as well as more encompassing working group. And I certainly hope that you would consider participating in that, because having input in districts in Wilton, Westport, and Norwalk, you have a part of major components that come into consideration. And just listening to your background, I think you and I share a very similar background in our joint appreciation that housing opportunities does give people a opportunity to break out cycles of poverty and economic challenges. That being said, I wanted to give you the opportunity to continue on your effective presentation. I think you talked about the as of right, the public hearing process. Are there any other considerations that you thought of that we should definitely be working toward being considerate of?
Sure. Thank you, Senator. And I would love to be a part. I have been a part of many conversations starting last July, long before I was elected to this body. This is a concern of mine because I do think we need more affordable housing in the state. And we've struggled with this in Norwalk as well, despite being, having met 830G and all of that. We still have people in the community that can't afford housing. So I have met with Desegregate Connecticut. I've met with P&Z chairs throughout Fairfield County. You've heard from some of the other people I've met with today. So I feel like I've been with you all day. So you've heard already a lot of the issues, and I echo some of them. Probably Danielle Dobin's testimony struck a lot of the similar chords to my feelings. In terms of what I would be interested in seeing in any legislation, I agree with her that adding teeth to 830J could actually work quite well. I did have a chance to go back and look at the 2019 legislation, and there was a proposal that would have linked discretionary state funding to compliance with moving 830J forward. So something like that I think is very interesting. If I use the nomenclature, it's the carrot, not the stick. Although I try to stay away from these terms. I was just thinking as I listened today, like, I wonder if there's a way to think about linking business tax credits to towns that are sort of doing a lot of work in encouraging mixed use development to foster greater economic growth. Again, it's something that would perhaps incentivize towns who want to bring businesses in to really focus on these components. I would love to see incentives for projects. I know Westport is trying to do something like this on publicly owned vacant land. Or I've heard from some of my peers in the eastern part of the state redeveloping existing empty properties because something like that is win-win for local communities. And I've also, this has come up a lot in Fairfield County, where home ownership is so out of reach for many, even in most of Norwalk. So looking at a way, and I'm not sure the state could intervene, but looking at a way that would encourage developers to contribute toward first-time home buyer programs in exchange for some types of bonuses, whether it be density or something else. I will just say the good things I saw in these proposals, and I'm talking about all of them now. A statewide needs assessment, I think, is important. I do think it's important to change some of the definitions to replace local codes, like what defines a family for ADUs. I do like some of the language about changing what character.
I'm sorry to interrupt again, but the 5 minutes is over.
Sorry, Senator.
Oh no, Representative Thomas, I was trying to let you go as long as I could.
Thank you.
And if I had a couple of extra minutes, I would have set you up to say, what are your thoughts in some of our rural communities? But I think I'm going to hand it off to Representative Dubitzky, who may ask you those very questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Thomas, for your eloquence in sharing that. I think you would be a fantastic contributor to offering many of the viewpoints, and also your background in planning and zoning would give you a local perspective as well on all the other things we talked about. So again, I hope Joe is still listening, that as he reconvenes that working group, I think you and I could be contributors to finding solutions. There is no one good way, and I hope that we take the best of every perspective and make it a sustainable plan to address critical housing issues in our state. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Representative Dubitzky.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative, for coming in. I was very impressed by very impressed by many of the statements you've made with regard to your experience. Would you be able to, you mentioned that you participated in a lot of approvals of various housing, and that there were thousands of apartment or thousands of units built. Could you relay your experience at how that actually changed the low income and affordable housing situation in the town you're involved in?
Thank you, Representative. It's a good question. I'm probably not the best expert because much of our, we've done two TOD plans. So the biggest is around our South Norwalk train station, and much of that was done before I joined the commission. But you know, it's a huge undertaking. It's, I don't even know how many thousands all in when it's all done. But you know, especially with COVID-19 here in Norwalk, we have a lot of people facing an affordability crisis with jobs lost, etc. I don't have the stat in front of me, but a significant portion of our community is cost burdened in terms of affording rent. And this is despite having so many apartments. So I do have a very real concern around, you know, where's that tipping point? At what point does the density actually depress pricing? Now, is Norwalk more affordable than trying to find an apartment in Wilton, for example? Absolutely. But there's a difference between affordable and more affordable.
Good. You know, I commiserate or associate myself with your remarks about definitions. When my town was redoing some of our zoning regulations, we looked at our regulations and said, okay, what's a family? And we actually spent many months doing research of town regulations all over the state, and we just couldn't figure out what to write on the piece of paper, so we gave up. And we decided we were not going to use the word, and we were not going to require familial connections because we just couldn't figure out how to make that definition. And I know there are plenty of definitions that in both state law and local zoning regulations that need to be tweaked. One of which is the term affordable housing. You know, I know that there is a sort of a feeling that we need more affordable housing. My feeling is that means housing that is inexpensive enough for people of low means to afford. But our state law has a very different definition of affordable housing. Is that something that you would want to work on to make it more in line with, well, let me ask you, what is your view of what affordable housing should mean?
You know, it's a good point because people use the term to apply to many, many different types of housing. There's certainly, I think today, most people are using it to mean, you know, 30% AMI. You know, so that's one standard. But as I said, there's a difference between more affordable and actually affordable based on, you know, what real people can afford to pay to live in a real home. There's also supportive housing, which is a real need, and we are working on that here in Norwalk. So I think at least for the purposes of any of this legislation, we should be very clear about what the end goal is before we come up with the solution. If it's, you know, a very baseline affordability. I think, again, Danielle Dobin probably, I think I heard her relate some figures, you know, affordable in Westport, frankly, an apartment in Westport is probably more than my home in Norwalk.
I'm so sorry to interrupt again, but the 5 minutes is up.
Okay, thank you. And it's probably more than my entire farm in Chaplin, probably half the town. But I thank you very much.
Definition is important. Yeah.
I thank you for your responses, and just because you know, I don't want to leave Senator Wong hanging. What is your view on how this would affect the rural communities like mine?
Again, I've never lived in a rural community, I'm not sure, but I have heard from some of my peers in the legislature that they are concerned because either they have no transit hub or their main street really can't foster a lot of development, or it's not worthwhile, or no one would come. They are more interested in ADUs, for example, but just want to make sure it's an approach that would work in their community, but they've expressed concerns as well.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate your answers, and I appreciate the time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Fiorello.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Rep. Thomas, given your experience working in P&Z, I wanted to ask, new housing in general, even in the category of, you know, affordable, is expensive. And is the problem scarcity of homes, or is the problem that when we look at the household housing burden, it's the fact that the incomes can't cover the cost of the construction, the maintenance, the utilities, and the taxes of a lot of these new homes that we're talking about? Because a lot of these bills, it's about flooding the market with new construction. What are you expressed some concerns about the bills, and I was wondering, it's about the income not able to match and pay for these new houses, so we're not really helping low income folks get into homes, are we?
I think that's a very broad question, so I'll just speak about Norwalk. Here, for example, we have at times for people to qualify for different bonuses or whatnot, we have actually been able to factor in greater affordability, you know, way beyond 10%. Some of our units provide for 30% affordability. Some are deed restricted, some offer subsidies. So it is possible to build and make those units actually affordable. There's just nothing in this legislation to me that requires that. So therefore it may not solve the problem.
Right, no, it doesn't require that.
Which is a supply problem.
Right, it doesn't. Right. And in your years of being on P&Z, have you ever thought that or have you come across folks who have thought that they wish their homes weren't deed restricted because they might, you know, be able to participate in the increase in value of their homes, like market growth and investment growth of the value of their homes?
I haven't. I think if I could characterize Norwalk, I think most people move here because they want a certain level of diversity. So I've never heard anyone talk about any negative effect to deed restrictions. And I would go one step further, as I've been exploring this issue in the surrounding towns. Interestingly enough, the type of deed restriction that came up with a negative taint, if you will, were the old deed restrictions in towns like Westport that did prevent people who looked like me from moving in, all of these covenants and, you know, sort of codified segregation that did exist in many of the towns in Fairfield County. So I've not heard anything about these types of deed restrictions, but I have heard people sort of shy away from the negative impact of early era deed restrictions in the 60s and 70s.
Okay. Great, thank you. Nice
Mhm.
talking to you.
Thank you.
Thank you, representatives. I appreciate your patience and your testimony tonight.
Am I done? Rep?
Yeah, that I don't see
Uh,
any, oh, no, I see Representative Zulo just put up his hand.
I'll be very, very brief.
I was too slow, right?
Almost got away.
My questions are very direct. So just to follow up, I see ADUs as a mechanism, as a vehicle to help those who are cost burdened. At least in some ways. I've already voiced concern that I don't want to see them turned into vacation rentals along that line. My question is, there are directives, there are provisions in here that pertain to creation of more opportunities for multifamily. Do you feel that those initiatives hit the mark as far as creating housing that will help those who are cost burdened, in light of some of the testimony we've heard today that if you create these opportunities for multifamily housing, you're just going to end up having these expensive multifamily units? So is that a concern of yours? And if it is, how do you propose to address it?
I mean, my concern is that all of these ideas are good ones, but they don't all work in every place. And to me, the secret sauce, if you will, is trying to figure out a way the state can be helpful in helping towns and municipalities do something that works for them, which is where I think incentives come in. ADUs, for example, in Norwalk, are not great for us because we have spent a lot of time creating a new POCD, which is really trying to focus certain types of development in certain areas, and we've built thousands of apartments. So as of right, ADUs everywhere is not great for us because it's sort of in direct competition to where we are trying to funnel growth, if you will. And I'm no longer on the zoning, so I don't want to speak for them. They may have different plans now, but all of that is to say, so I agree. I share the concerns, which is why I'm here today, that, you know, in some towns, multifamily will just create more very expensive units than it already has in my neck of the woods.
So even though I think all of us agree to some extent that obviously zoning is an enabling act in Connecticut and towns aren't able to do certain things with zoning, what you're saying though is that this top-down approach in that regard is not going to be helpful in your community.
Correct.
Okay. Like I said, very direct. Thank you
you.
very much. You're off the hook. I shouldn't say that. I don't know if there's anybody.
I know,
else.
you never know. Someone else may have raised a hand.
I don't see anyone else's hand raised. Thank you, Representative Zulo.
Thank
you,
you,
Representative.
Senator. I'll go while the getting's good.
Log off quickly.
Bye-bye.
Mr. Clerk, can you tell me